All right, we're gonna get social studies going here. I need social studies notebooks out. And then on your iPad, you'll want to pull up the lesson 2 PDF for chapter 8. We're gonna finish reading. So we left off at the Townsend Acts on page 306. I'll give you a second to get situated. Notebooks and the PDF open for lesson 2.
Wait, was lesson 2 the one we were doing yesterday or not?
Yes, lesson 2 is the one we worked on yesterday.
Alright. Are we still on,
306 is where we're at. The Townsend Acts. So they've already passed 2 taxes. What were they? 2 were passed. What were they, Kenny?
the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act?
Right, they did the Sugar Act first. Okay, and then they did the Stamp Act. So the Stamp Act, they passed and then they repealed. So they put it out there and then colonists were protesting it so much that they took it away. But then what did they do? They did the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act. They passed one more after those taxes. Nick?
The T one?
Not the T one. We're not there yet. Claire? The Stamp Act they repealed. As they repealed it, they did what, Adam? That's what we're going to talk about. There was something in between. It wasn't really a tax, Kenny. It was something else.
The Declaratory Act?
Yeah, the Declaratory Act. And what did that do? Josh?
Make like our own land?
No, it wasn't about making their own land. So the British passes, the British king passes the Declaratory Act, and it told the American colonists what, Kenny?
That the British can make whatever laws they want.
Right, that they can make whatever laws they want. You have to follow. Okay, so it told the colonists, we're pretty much in charge, and you have to do what we want. Okay, that's what that law was supposed to do. Okay?
Wait, have we gotten to the township?
That's where we're at right now. So in your notebook, Roman numeral 3, or use a number 3, however you're setting up your notes. The Townsend Acts is our next bold print letters there that we are going to read about. So keep in mind, colonists are already getting pretty angry, right? They're protesting British goods. Okay, they're stopping those tax collectors with the Sons of Liberty. The Daughters of Liberty are trying to make their own cloth and do their own things so they don't have to pay for British goods. And then in come the Townsend Acts. I'm going to read, and you're going to follow along. In 1767, Parliament passed several new tax laws called the Townsend Acts. The Townsend Acts taxed imports, such as tea, glass, paint, and paper that were brought into the colonies. So an import is something that is brought in. If it's being exported, they're sending it out. Okay, so they're importing these goods from other places. So the Townsend Acts are taxing those imports. The new laws also set up a new group of tax collectors. Even though Parliament had repealed the Stamp Act, the Townsend Acts showed that Parliament believed it still had the right to make laws for the colonists. So, what were they? So far, what are the Townsend Acts? We got some more to read. John?
Townsend Acts protects imports such as glass, tea, and paper.
Right, glass, tea, and paper. Okay. Paint was in there. I'm going to add it here. Remember, imports are things brought into the country or into their land. And if you can't remember that, you might want to add that note. Okay. Export sends them out. It's exiting the colonies. Import is bringing it into the colonies. Brendan?
Should we add that, please?
You can. If you don't think you remember what imports are, then you might want to add that.
Add
think
Okay.
Import is like, wait, import's bringing it.
Right, imports
So, like,
bring them in.
when we send something to Notability.
We export. Yeah, you might say that. You're exporting it to Notability, and then you're importing it back to Schoology eventually.
It actually says import when you put it back.
Okay.
What lesson are we on?
Lesson 2. More boycotts. What are boycotts? Nick?
Kind of like protest.
Kind of, yeah. It's a way to protest. It is.
They're like not doing something.
Right. If I'm boycotting something, I'm not buying it or I'm not going. Okay, but boycotting is a way for them to protest. Because once again, many colonists joined together in boycotting British goods. The Daughters of Liberty asked people to stop drinking British tea, and merchants in Boston could not import taxed goods. Some colonists would not paint their houses because they did not want to pay the tax on paint. Like the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts did not last very long. Sales of British goods in the colonies went down, and tax officers collected little money. In 1770, Parliament repealed all of the Townshend Acts except for the tax on tea. However, many colonists still would not buy British tea. As the number of people taking part in protests grew, Parliament sent more soldiers to the colonies. By 1770, about 9,000 British soldiers were in the colonies. About 4,000 of them were stationed in the city of Boston. So what happened? So here it starts in 1767, right? What happens in 1770? What happens, Brendan?
About 9,000 British soldiers were in the colony.
They send more soldiers. Why? What's happening? What are those colonists doing? Emmy? Yeah, because protests are growing. What else happens in 1770? Should be writing this down. These are important notes you're going to want to have. Kenny, what else happens?
More people are boycotting.
That's the protesting. Protests are growing. They're boycotting more things. What happened to those Townshend Acts? Are they still in place? Something changed about them. What changed? John?
They only tax tea now.
Right, now they only tax tea. So they repealed those acts and they only left the tax on tea. So, tax repealed, except on tea. Okay. That gets us then to the Boston Massacre, which is the last section in this lesson. So you have 307 and 308 left there to read.
What do we write in our, like, on this thing? What should we write?
Good question. Let me get this pulled up here, Nick, and we'll talk about that.
What
Okay?
did we put for this? Tax repeal.
All right. So you're going to want to make sure you have this written down, and I'll explain this in a minute. Nick was asking, I'm believing, about this paper. Okay, so the cause of the Revolutionary War. So we did the Stamp Act, Sons of Liberty. At the bottom is the Townshend Act. So you would just put in there 1767 and that it taxed imported goods. Okay, this is kind of a quick reference sheet. Okay, and I would keep that in the folder. It's a quick reference of the important things that happened. Okay, and their order that they happened before we get to the war. So that's what that is. So you should have the Stamp Act filled in, Sons of Liberty. Today we did the Townshend Acts. And then on the back here, Boston Massacre. Okay, you're going to add some notes about that. Again, you want the year and what it was. That's the main things to write on that little quick reference. Okay? So those notes for section 3, which gets us then to our section 4, the Boston Massacre. I'm going to let you read that and finish those notes on your own. I have 2 questions here to kind of guide your reading. Okay, you want to know what caused it. Okay, what caused this so-called massacre? And who was involved? So I'm looking more for in general. What were the two sides? Okay. So you're looking for those two things. There's some important people. I think they talk about Crispus Attucks in here on this section, as well as Paul Revere. Those are important people you should have already written down. So I didn't add their names here. But they are two people that you need to keep their names in mind and their importance in this particular event. Okay? So you're going to finish reading Lesson 2, answering these questions on the Boston Massacre, and then you have an 8-2 worksheet on Schoology. It's a lot of matching. You are going to want to make sure you use these notes as well as that Lesson 2 PDF. If you can't find it in your notes, then go back to the lesson information and see where you can find it there. Okay? Or your vocab people places. That's always helpful as well. That's why we do it. Okay? Finish Lesson 2, 8-2 worksheet for social studies.